It may not look like much from the outside, but this is a Toronto institution. Sneaky Dee has been at the corner of College and Bathurst since 1990, serving giant plates of nachos, hosting live music, and giving generations of Torontonians a place to hang out. Here's General Manager George Diamantouros.
Somebody told me that if you picked up the Lonely Planet under Toronto, if you want to see the real Toronto, you got to go to Sneaky Dee because it's such a cross-section of the city.
But now, its future is up in the air. And the reason will sound familiar to anyone who's watched the city change over the years: a proposed condo development. But community members and Sneaky Dee's fans aren't willing to give up without a fight. We look at why so many people are coming together to protect a dive bar and who has the power to save it. But first, what does Sneaky Dee's have in common with coffee shops, bookstores, and parks? Well, they're all examples of third places, meaning they're not home or work. We dig into why third places are so important for building community and what we lose when they disappear. Welcome to The Rundown. Back in the 80s, sociologist Ray Oldenburg coined the term third place. It's where we gather apart from home and work in a spirit of camaraderie and joviality, and we enjoy one another's company. And experts say these third places are crucial for health and happiness. From London, Debbie Laliberte Rudman is a distinguished university professor in the School of Occupational Therapy at Western University. Corey Horowitz is an associate and senior urban planner at Dialogue. Said Yassin is a cultural programmer and founder of It's Okay Studios. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us in studio. Debbie, thank you for joining us on the line. Said, I'm coming to you first. You have been involved in creating welcoming spaces for much of your career. Tell us about your latest venture, It's Okay.
Yeah, It's Okay, was birthed out of, just like a sense of like not feeling, having a space where I could be. And I feel like my goal has kind of shifted into becoming like a space provider and a kind of like a hub for community. So I built this thing called It's Okay Studios. It started as like a multidisciplinary concert series that would pop up in like various non-traditional venues. And the whole thing was, bringing people into a space for the first time, a space that no community has claim to, where folks who look like me can come in and enjoy a night of music. And it kind of spawned now into having like a physical community hub at the corner of Queen and Augusta where folks can come in and access space.
One of the questions I think when I saw It's Okay was the name. What's the story behind it? Because I would say it's awesome, it's better, but It's Okay, what does that mean?
Yeah, it's not a great story. I don't know. I worked in restaurants for my whole entire life, and the heartbeat of a lot of fine dining restaurants in Toronto is the Sri Lankan community. And honestly, a lot of times it was like, working with these folks and asking them if they were needed support or needed help, and they would just always tell me everything was okay. And depending on the tonality of how they said it, it was either I'm okay, or I'm okay. And so it was just like, so it's kind of a roundabout name, but that's kind of where it comes from. But people have kind of taken it as they've seen it and made it their own thing.
I was going to say, as a Tamil person, I know those stories very well.
Absolutely,
so there you go. Corey, as an urban planner, help me understand. I want to get into your brain here. How do you design a city with public space in mind?
Yeah, so in my work, I think, traditionally it is something we can do to build in, to carve out space for, your traditional public spaces like a park, a community center, a library, what have you. What's more difficult, and also, that's at the scale of site-specific development, a single project, or, a larger long-term plan for a neighborhood. But what's more difficult is defining the quality and the character of these spaces through planning, through urban design. It's getting at like the organic qualities. How do you allow for communities to kind of appropriate these spaces, to use them in the way that's valuable for them? And a lot of that has to do with, when you're talking about redevelopment, replacement of old buildings. Come back to an urban planner cliche, mentioning Jane Jacobs, as we often do. The value of old buildings. Cities need old buildings, and I just think that that's a quality that's essential to getting character-filled spaces that are a sense of place for communities, rather than just saying we're going to put a new community center here, which we obviously need that stuff as well.
I imagine public consultation, part of the process, understanding sort of the community as well.
Yeah, and I think like the more directly you can engage with the public and communities and have their needs, their priorities feed into a plan for a new project or a design, and direct community action. We're seeing a lot of community grassroots groups, nonprofit groups, things like community land trusts coming up as ways to more directly define what communities need.
Debbie, your research looks at sort of what's at stake in terms of, when local businesses close and communities lose those third places, what exactly does happen?
Well, I think there's a lot of evidence to tell us that these places where people and communities can come together and feel connected are really important to individual and community health. And I think that's really what's at stake. A 2023 U.S. Surgeon General's report really pointed to social connectedness as sort of such an important predictor of the health of communities, so community vitality, social cohesion, but a really underappreciated thing. And it really pointed to the kinds of social infrastructures we need for people to come together and not feel lonely. And there's a lot of evidence to show that a significant proportion of populations do feel lonely. And the US Surgeon General actually estimated that feeling lonely most of the time is as harmful to health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
Right.
So I think, the health effects as well as that effect on community vitality are what's at stake.
Help me understand, Debbie, where does the responsibility lie in creating those spaces? As we have, Said, grassroots, we have Corey, an urban planner, but whose role is that?
Well, I think it's all about partnerships. And I really, in listening to the other two panel members, this idea of the community being part of this, the idea of appropriating spaces, so communities having some latitude and freedom to create the spaces that work for them rather than this kind of predetermined top-down. But because I think of the impacts on health and social vitality and community safety, this is also a role for municipalities as well as at the provincial level where those responsibilities lie, and thinking about how can the funding be created, how can the zoning be created that supports this kind of community space.
Said, help me understand a little bit of the challenges in terms of, getting a space off the ground. You've been in this space for a couple of years now.
Yeah, we've been here for 4 years. Yeah, I mean, building a community space, a DIY space, it's like no easy endeavor. It is definitely, there's like no money in it. The roadmap is confusing, and a lot of times these spaces are precarious. Even in the space that we're in, currently, it's we were only able to access it because it's going to become a park. So we have had this kind of funny meanwhile lease, and we've been able to kind of like make things work while we've had the space, but. Yeah, the challenges are many. I think I don't think people really understand the need for these spaces. I don't think like on a deep level, the space, the feeling of not belonging, not having a safe space to go to, isn't top of mind for a lot of folks who have the decision power to be able to like create throughways for these spaces to exist. So it's not a priority, I don't think, and so the burden is left for community members who a lot of times it's like a trauma response, creating these spaces, like building something that you wish you had when you were younger, and it's okay. It's definitely something that I wish I had when I was younger.
Corey, I understand you're a music fan. And when an independent music venue like Toronto Sneaky Dee, which has been a launch pad for many bands and musicians, is at risk of redevelopment, what dies with it?
Yeah, I think the challenge with that is what is the replacement, or how do you come close to even replacing the value of something that has developed over decades, like a Sneaky Dee's? Some people might look at it and say it's a dive bar, but it was a lot more than that. There's a lot of nuance to the programming it offered, a performance venue, trivia nights, whatever it may be. And I think when you redevelop on a site like that, and presumably what's coming in is a tall condo or apartment building, and we need housing. I wouldn't argue otherwise, but trying to replicate or replace that kind of space in a shiny new building, to me, is a big part of the challenge. And so it's like, can you imagine Sneaky Dee's being even in the podium of a new building like that? And I think there are some tools that are starting to emerge, through the City of Toronto, for example, through community-driven initiatives that recognize and protect the value of those spaces. But to me, it's what you lose. I mean, it's the texture of a community. It's that organic sense of place. It becomes more homogenous when this happens over and over again on a block or in a neighborhood, right?
So you'd help me understand a little bit more in sort of detail the challenges for communities. So you talked about, you wish you had a place like It's Okay. When people are calling to inquire about the space that you are offering, what are the challenges of finding space? What do you hear from them being like, okay, we're happy that this place exists. We haven't been able to find one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's financial barriers, there's, things are expensive, especially coming out of the pandemic, especially for musicians. Like the amount of times I've heard, I booked this venue, they're taking a cut of my door, there's a bar minimum and a rental fee, and they're like, this is not sustainable, and so there's financial, just respect, I'm going to a space, I have the money to pay for it, but they treat me as if, I need to earn their respect, and I'm not a paying patron. And so I think what people get when they come to me is like, someone who understands. I've been in those shoes a countless amount of times, so many that those memories are just like burrowed into my brain, of just times I was treated less than. And so, yeah, I mean, those are two of the main ones, but and also just like flex space. I don't think we have enough of that in the city where it could be a music venue, it could also be an art gallery. I think spaces a lot of times are kind of boxed into one thing, and a lot of those times those people who offer space can't see their spaces beyond, we are a music venue, we are a art gallery. So, I think flexibility is something also like that is missing.
Debbie, as you noted, the pandemic highlighted a lot, and we haven't necessarily recovered from those years. What are your concerns with how cities are sort of filling in the gaps when it comes to third places? Will there be a day when we don't have necessarily third spaces?
Well, I think we have to recognize the importance of them more than we do at this point in time. And I think it's also that intersection of spatial precarity and social precarity. So it's also thinking about third places for whom and for what. That idea of flex spaces works really well because different communities might enter that space for different reasons and for different forms of connection. So thinking kind of outside of the box. I think the other big threat is the commercialization of a lot of third places and this sort of big commercialization, so the loss of things like local diners or local clubs during the pandemic, and this sort of entry point of these larger kind of homogenous businesses that really don't deal with those barriers like affordability or various forms of discrimination that people might be facing. So I think it's looking at those intersections of spatial and social precarity, and we know that there are particular groups in society who are at much higher risk of experiencing social disconnectedness, such as older adults who are low income or persons who are gender diverse. And so thinking about youth as another group, so thinking about the groups that are at risk of social precarity and then thinking about what spaces actually exist for them to connect.
Corey, what does success look like? When I think of an urban planner, I think of it sort of front-loaded, where you are in the planning stages, consultation process. How does this all look? But what does success actually look like for an urban planner?
Tough question. It's a project-to-project consideration, and it's a matter of scale. But ultimately, if I could simplify it, it's having a sort of a complete mix of uses on a project. So if you're talking at the neighborhood level, obviously that can involve a number of different land uses, not just having a bunch of residential towers, but having the supplementary spaces, community spaces, parks, libraries, and having those more flexible spaces that can be, like we've said, appropriated by the community, whether that be indoor event spaces available or just sort of less fully programmed type spaces that can be adapted over time. So I think it's just I think about a complete community lens.
Is there, and we can look at it sort of across the province, is there an example of a place that you look at and be like, I wish we did that more?
As in like
in terms of this community, in terms of third place, in terms of all of these all meshing together.
I mean, I've come from a place of a strong interest in affordable housing and inclusive communities, and I think of the St. Lawrence neighborhood in Toronto often, just in the way that they have a very livable kind of scale. It's dense in terms of the population, but it's a high quality design, and it has, a massive linear park space that gets used in different ways. It has recreational uses built in. It has like mobility connections for pedestrians, for cycling. It's just that jumble, that great mix that we often look for, and it's something that can't be replicated, it seems, on a lot of projects, partly because of, it received at the time a lot of provincial funding, for one thing, to have a mix of housing types and affordability levels.
So as you mentioned, community has really resonated with It's Okay and the space there. I'm curious, in terms of the roadblocks and challenges in creating more third spaces or places, what would you be telling policymakers, or levels of government when it comes to, I think money is one thing for sure, but what are some of the roadblocks that you've hit that you think could be addressed with these decision makers?
Yeah, I mean, arts funding is being cut. We know that, and I think opening up more funding for physical spaces. We're losing spaces just kind of across the board, and I think creating more throughways for also just like grassroots and small mid-sized arts organizations or community organizations to access funding. You look at who gets money, and a lot of times it's just kind of these like big organizations that get money year after year after year after year. And I don't think anyone ever examines the output or the work that's being done at with those organizations. It's kind of just like they've been historically funded, and I think someone needs to start looking at the impact, because when you invest in a small or mid-sized organization, the output is so much more. Like the amount of things that we've been able to do in our space is honestly just so remarkable to me every day. The amount of people being able to do their thing for the first time, you know what I mean? And put together their first gallery, their first concert, their first activation, you know what I mean? And those opportunities are few and far between. And so I think just like looking at how we can fund folks who are, everything kind of bubbles from the underground too, you know what I mean? So if you're investing in these small things, they become big things eventually. And It's Okay kind of has become a big thing, but it started as like a little baby thing, you know?
Very good. Yeah. Debbie, I am curious, you talked a little bit about it, but how do we move forward with sort of balancing having places to hang out and linger and not feel like, I have to order a drink and you keep the things flowing, but also making sure that there's a balance with the economic pressure that, those small businesses do have money to sort of pay their rent at the end of the month.
Yeah, well, I think there's room for diverse kinds of third places, and some of them might be connected to that profit motive and that kind of business motive, and others might not be. And so to me, it's not the idea of only having like profit-driven third places, but also not negating profit-driven third places, but also thinking about not-for-profits or places where it really is about that low-cost option and the endpoint isn't profit, which may seem a bit out of the box. But I think when we think about public places, we have to think about the fact that they don't necessarily need to be commercialized places. And as an occupational therapist, I'm also thinking about spaces for doing, right? Spaces that draw people in to do things together. So to me, it's not just about spaces to socialize, but it's often that doing element that draws people in, whether it's an art-based place or cafe or a place where people come together to play cards, or a place where people come together to do exercise together in a public park. To me, it's that bringing people together through this draw of something they all want to do together is the most important thing. And then thinking about a balance between sort of commercialized third places and then non-commercial third places.
Well, I hope this was a third place for all three of you today. I know that you guys have busy schedules, but I really appreciate your time, your insights on this. Debbie, Corey, Said, thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
Organizers are starting petitions and filling committee rooms at Toronto City Hall. Their goal? To save one of the city's legendary dive bars, Sneaky Dee's. George Diamantouros is the general manager of Sneaky Dee's, and he joins me from the second floor of Sneaky Dee's. How are you doing, George?
I'm doing well today, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well. All right, help us understand sort of what we've seen over the headlines is this outpouring of support from Sneaky Dee fans over the last couple of weeks. What has it been like to see so much love?
Well, it's really been kind of incredible. We know where we stand in in the local music scene and in the community in general. But it's really incredible to see it all unfold like this. And it's been really good because we've been part of a conversation that I guess has to exist in Toronto these days. And we're definitely very happy.
Tell me about that conversation. What have we seen in terms of sports? I know people have been wearing pins, people have been speaking at City Hall, but when you talk about sort of that conversation that we are seeing here in the city, what are you talking about?
Well, the larger conversation is obviously the loss of cultural spaces in Toronto, independent music venues, independent restaurants, just sort of the corporatization of the city. And where it all goes from here and what role people power is going to play in it, right?
I wanna talk about sort of that connection that a lot of Torontonians and people outside of this city that have with Sneaky Dee's. Why do people feel so strong about your business?
With us in particular, I've always felt that that people think this is their place, whether it's their first time here or they've been coming here for years. They feel comfortable and at home. They get to see something unique here. Not to say that that doesn't exist in other parts of the city, but because we've been around so long, it's very much a part of Toronto in general.
As you mentioned, Sneaky Dee's is one of the only independent music venues in the city, not operated by Live Nation. What does that tell us about its long history in Toronto's music scene?
It just means that we're still a place where people can go and see, local bands for, relatively inexpensive, ticket prices and beer prices. And it's something that's sort of vanishing from the landscape of the city as it's getting harder and harder for young bands to break in. There's less spaces where they could come up and develop in. There are a few places left, but prior to the pandemic and then post-pandemic, there are fewer and fewer. They seem to be not as embraced by the city at large, by city council, let's say, but the citizens definitely require that and need that in their lives. And we fill that gap, and we hope to continue filling that for a long time.
You were talking about City Hall, so I have to ask, where do we stand right now with the business, with the business's future? I know that this is a conversation that you guys have had to sort of deal with at once in 2020, and here we are again. But where do we stand with sort of the redevelopment project?
As it stands right now, it's still going to go to a vote to the city in July. We have to prepare for all sorts of inevitabilities. We hope to keep, pending approval of development. We hope to keep operating. We hope that if the property is developed, that we return here and we're able to operate once again in what's become our neighborhood for the last almost 40 years. But we have to prepare for the possibility that we might have to move somewhere in the interim or possibly permanently.
Have you started to look in terms of locations across this city? I know a lot of people look at that corner and say that is that
and that's
corner.
The thing. It's hard to come down to Little Italy or Kensington Market and not notice Sneaky Dee's just standing there because it's been there for almost 40 years. But we definitely would want to stay in the neighborhood. But the real estate in Toronto it's not easy. Spaces are increasingly expensive. We'll see what happens. We have to sort of take a wait and see approach.
You talk about the musicians and sort of the need for spaces like that. I remember, I don't know, I think when I was in high school, I remember there's probably still, my name etched on a table or on a wall or in the bathroom or something like that. But if the city, if councillors do decide to accept the redevelopment plans, what does the city lose in that case? Not just as a music venue, but a third space for a lot of people, just to kind of, have a beer and have some very well-priced nachos.
I've heard a lot of people describe this place as their second home. So I've heard some people describe it as their first home. And I feel like, I don't want to overstate what we are, but, I let our customers and I let our fans and I let, the bands that play music here and the sort of cultural events that happen, I let them sort of describe what they feel about it. And to quote some of them, it's gonna be a loss. It's again exceedingly difficult to find spaces like this where people can form communities and feel like they're a part of something. When in an isolating world, in a world of TikTok and Instagram, this is a kind of place where people can come and just hang out and have well-priced nachos and cheap beer and watch a local band. So it's all those things,
Now, you had mentioned that, for some people, this is not just their second home, but their first home, which also makes me think of, this Sneaky Dee's is a family-run business. What is it like, to be able to say that, you are an institution and that you see that sort of community outpouring?
Well, I mean, it feels very special because, my father and his brothers started this back in 1987. Actually in a different location on Bloor Street, across the street from Monasteads, which is also gone. But and I grew up in this business, and as much as it feels like home to me, I understand where people are coming from when they say this is their first home. And it's unfortunate, but it might be inevitable. But at the end of the day, the heart of what is Sneaky Dee's is going to remain and possibly move to somewhere else, or might be right back in this exact space. I tend to be on the optimistic side, especially when I see an outpouring of support.
George, we're gonna have to leave it there, but I appreciate your time. Wish you all the best in the sort of the next steps here, and I hope I was talking to fellow producers here that hope we can get some nachos and beer soon, and so we might make a
please
make a trip
anytime.
out to
And
Sneaky
then
Dee's.
if you can't find where you wrote your name, you'll have to just do it again.
There we go. All right, really appreciate it. Take care, George.
Okay, thank you very much. Have a great day.
I'm Jan. Thanks for watching The Rundown. I have a question for you. What are your favorite third places? Where do you spend your time when you're not at work or at home? Let us know. Send your suggestions and feedback to rundown@tvo.org, or as always, leave us a comment on our YouTube page. Until then, I will see you tomorrow.